Now, Murph, I know I just told you a scary story, but trust me, illusory walls are not real. They can't hurt you, okay? So just take it easy.
Okay. Brogan, I do have one question.
What's up?
Where did this wall come from?
Oh, hey, illusory wall, what's up?
Oh, hello. Sorry, yeah, I forgot to inform you, this illusory wall is real, actually. So maybe there is a threat.
Yeah. Initiate combat. I'm so honored for this special guest. Go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I go by Illusory Wall. I guess I'm perhaps best known in the Dark Souls community and greater Soulsborne games. I make videos about their mechanics and game design. I do sort of like these stupidly deep dives into the most like arcane minutia. My real name is Patrick, though, and I'm also just a big fan of retro games in general as well. And yeah, I think that's me in a nutshell there.
Well, what was your history with games? Like, did you grow up with them?
Yes.
I'm guessing you did.
Yeah, so I'm in my mid-30s. So like the youngest games that I can remember being new, like going into a store, would be like the Super Nintendo era of games. But I grew up with a couple of Amiga computers in the household. So I grew up playing like a lot of weird, obscure computer games from like the mid to late 80s. That would be like where my nostalgia most deeply lies.
Does that come also from the sound? I'm guessing that's a big thing then, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the sound of consoles, like, of everything, all the game systems, computers, like, that's something that I got really attached to early on. I remember being a kid and, like, not knowing how to hook up the audio recorder, like, cassette recorder properly to the computer and just doing, like, a microphone record and, like, recording the audio of, like, computer game music and, like, making my own compilations back in the day as a kid, just because it was, like, I love this music and, like...
You'd make your own mixtape?
I'd make my own mixtape. Like, I would get to, like, a level in Lemmings that had, like, more, like, evil-sounding music than, like, the rest of the soundtrack, and it's like, oh, I gotta sample that because that sounds cool. And, like, yeah, I've been in love with video games and game music since I was a little kid.
Well, that segues into your podcast or whatever you used to. Your latest upload was, I think, 2 years ago, but you did retro game audio with Steve, and basically you talk about music and how the audio works for each hardware and specific things. Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I just got really into trying to figure out, like, you know, why does the Nintendo sound the way it does? Why does the Sega Genesis sound the way it does? I think there was that sort of, like, era in the early 2000s where, like, you know, emulators had already been around for a good while at that point, but, like, there were more and more tools coming out where you just emulate the soundtracks directly. Like, oh, I'm going to download the soundtrack of this game and open it up, and I can turn on and off the different sound channels. And something about that just, like, really stuck with me for some reason, where it was like, oh, I didn't realize that's how they did that. And I guess it's similar to the stuff I do with Dark Souls in a way, where it's like, I get really absorbed in something and I just want to know more about how it works. And if I think there's something kind of cool or novel about it, I want to share it with everyone.
Especially since Soulsborne is, like, super novel. Like, there's novel mechanics for the sake of the fact that other games wouldn't do them. Like, fucking World Tendency. You know what I mean? Like,
oh god, yes. Yeah.
Like, who else would do that? So then, yeah, it is interesting inherently, and then I'm sure you just go deep into it. But speaking of mixtapes, you also do, like, you did Halloween episodes and you did multiple episodes where you would splice in specific video game music. Some of it are deep cuts, obscure picks. Tell us, what is the secret to a good Halloween vibe?
The secret to a good Halloween vibe for video game music, I have to say, I might be a bit biased because of my childhood, but it's all about the Amiga. Something about that platform. There's so many soundtracks with just a really creepy vibe. And the Amiga sounds the way it does. It has 4 sound channels that are all sample-based. They can play 8-bit audio samples. And there's just something with, like, that 90s audio sample quality where, like, I don't know, it's really good for making, like, 90s, like, house music. And, like, you can kind of get, like, a cheesy aesthetic that way. But something about, like, if you listen to NES music and you ask, like, oh, what's creepy music? Like, again, this might be topical for the episode. People might say Castlevania, but it's like, it's kind of because of the aesthetic of the game, right? Like, you have, like, a horror aesthetic, but the music's, like, really funky and cool and driving. It's usually not really, like, scary or creepy. So I find the most haunted soundtracks are always the stuff that's really, like, ambient lo-fi samples. They have a way of just sounding really unnatural and spooky.
Gotcha. And you also make your own music as well. You make chiptune music. I saw you recently uploaded the Majula. You did like a remix of the Majula theme as well. And topically to Castlevania 3. I'm guessing this was you, right? Because it was the Retro Game Audio YouTube channel. You mixed Castlevania 3's American and Japanese sounds. Or was that a different channel?
Oh, so that is a channel that I made. That was actually done by a friend of mine years ago, though. So I can't take credit for mixing the two versions of the soundtrack together. Oh yeah, they go by Kirby.
There you go. Thank you, Kirby. It was sick.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a fantastic mix. Yeah, if you have like show notes somewhere, you can link to that because it is such a good way to listen to the Castlevania 3 soundtrack with the two different versions mashed together. It's fantastic.
Gotcha. But anyways, back to you. How do you approach making chiptune music?
I think the thing that I'm really into is trying to explore all of the aspects that make it unique. My whole thing with like early video game music is that like you have all these simple waveforms, but if you look at like early synthesizer, like let's say you have an analog synthesizer sitting in front of you, you have a Moog synthesizer, you can make square waves and sine waves and triangle waves with that synth. But if you listen to old like synth records from the 60s and 70s, it's something very distinct from video game music. Like you're not going to listen to one of those records and be like, oh, this sounds like an NES game. So it's like, despite being both like simple waveforms, what really is the difference fundamentally? And to really understand the differences, you'd have to look at all the little weird tricks and techniques that were used in game composition. And that's where a lot of the identity comes from. So I think when I open up like Famitracker and I want to make an NES track, I kind of wanted to just throw a lot of absurd, kind of weird tricks and details in there. Stuff that makes it sound very unmistakably like, oh, this is like an NES for real. Like, this isn't just a couple things mapped to a square wave that kind of sounds similar to it. I just, like, really want to get in there. It's also kind of why, like, a lot of my covers that I do of Souls tracks are very, like, horrendously unfaithful. Like, Majula has drums. Like, I made, like, this heavy kind of, like, prog rock track. Like, nothing like the relaxed atmosphere of the original. And, I think that's sort of born from just like, oh, I want to get in there and just like really craft all these sounds in such a way that it's like really unmistakably, has this certain vibe to it.
Well, I mean, I think in layman's terms, that's also like thinking of it in terms of like their own specific instrument, and you're utilizing each tool that specific sound offers. And I think that totally makes sense to explore those arenas. I think the Majula track is sick. I like the original. I like the new one.
Well, thank you.
Now, Murph and I usually talk visually. I think we fuck up a lot and we don't talk about sound design. So could you tell us, what do you think the listeners should consider when they play a video game to regard for sound design in games?
Ooh, that's a really difficult thing to quantify, but I think it's how much does the sound get stuck in your head? So we could be talking music itself, or we could just be talking soundscapes and sound design. To me, it's really important in your game to have the audio stand out. You want that to be a memorable experience in and of itself. I think the games like, again, we can talk Castlevania. I think about like the sort of those later what was the name of I'm blanking right now. When the Spanish company came in and made those later 3D entries. Those soundtracks were very just like dull to me in a way, where it was very like theatrical, very like almost like stock movie soundtrack kind of music. And I think if you're making a game, that's not the direction you want to go in. You don't want to play it safe and have everything to sound like, oh, this could also be in the background of a TV show. It's like, no, you want to craft an identity. And again, I think that applies to things beyond music too, though. Like, I don't know why I have PT
sound
on the
effects
mind.
And all that, yeah.
Yeah, sound like thinking of just like horror games where like maybe like a certain voice comes on in a certain way. Where just I think of all like those radio segments in Silent Hill PT where the guy's talking and it just has like a really strong identity and vibe to it. And it's like, I think that's the most important part of audio is you want it to be memorable.
I agree with that. Last question, and this will broad into broad discussion. I didn't tell you this one. What is your favorite Halloween candy?
Ooh, Oof. Wow.
He wasn't ready for that one. Murph, what's your favorite Halloween candy?
Yeah, Murph, go first.
What? When I was a child, I was a huge chocolate slut. So I would take anything that was just like pure chocolate. Three Musketeers is my go-to. As I have gotten older, chocolate's gotten kind of boring, and I go towards like fruit candies like Skittles or Sour Patch Kids. I think the watermelon Sour Patch Kids is like the most perfect candy. But I had to stop eating it because it was stripping away the lining of my throat, which is why I sound like how I do now.
You just stuffed your face full of them before a podcast, and you thought there was no problem with this. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say mine. Mine were, I'd say candy corn. I'll defend candy corn to my dying breath. I'm a huge chocolate slut, but I like peanuts in my chocolate. I like peanut butter. So Reese's is a big thing. Snickers.
Yes,
and
Reese's.
then generally they'd never have these for Halloween because everyone would get pissed and TP their house. But I love black licorice as candy.
Oh.
They are
Boo.
so good.
Yeah.
So.
Where you go, I can't follow, Mr. Brogan.
Yeah, I can't do the licorice thing. I will vouch for, as a kid, I loved candy corn. But I kind of get, like, I don't know, as I've gotten older, like, I started to like it less and less. But when you ask, like, Halloween candy, I think the first mental image that came to mind was just, like, a Reese's cup. So I'm like,
yeah.
I think that would have to be my pick.
I think Reese's cup is pretty, like, top-tier candy, all things considered.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's simple, elegant, beautiful.
I would always save Smarties, because in my elementary school, Smarties were a currency. But I never ate them myself. I was never big on the candies that were just straight sugar, like Pixie Sticks, or a lot of like Twizzlers and things.
I hate those bottle caps. You know those? Dude, I hate the wax. Those wax bottles with like a little bit of liquid in them. I hate them.
No. Or the Dippin' Sticks or whatever they were. I couldn't do those.
Yeah, no thanks.
Okay, all right. So Illusory, what games have you played this week?
Stray. Stray would be the most recent game that I've been playing that's new to me. Have you guys played Stray yet at all? Seen any of it yet?
No, I don't have it. Is it PS5 exclusive or is it Xbox Series X Scarlet exclusive? I forget.
I think it's PS5 exclusive. I'm not 100% sure,
Okay.
but that's what I have it on, so... yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm enjoying it. It's, so to describe the game, what it plays like, you are a cat. It's like the cat game.
Already, yeah, starting strong.
Yep, it's got like this like post-apocalyptic vibe. It's not a spoiler because it's like the starting premise, but it's like you kind of fall into a hole. You wind up in this underground area that it's like there's some robots living there. And without the game telling you, it's kind of like, are there even people still left in this world? It doesn't look too promising from, what I've seen so far. I haven't finished the game yet. I'm probably like 3/4 the way through or so. It's cool, but it's basically like a puzzle platformer game. You jump around as a cat, but it's very controlled in the sense that it's not like an open platformer. There's no like jumping off of a roof and like dying because you missed the jump.
Yeah. Everything
is very scripted. Like if there's a box or a crate you can jump onto, it's like press X to land on that nearby available platform. So there's that sort of trade-off where because of that, the graphics are absolutely incredible. Because they can make it as like detailed of a world as they want, and they don't have to worry about like, how an organic gameplay would fit into that environment. Everything's very tightly crafted and controlled. But also because of that, a lot of it's very linear. It's basically segmented so that's like go through a linear stretch, maybe get to like a town or city that's a bit more open where there'll be like some fetch quest kind of stuff you can do with like, occasional small side mission stuff. And then it'll be like another linear stretch. So the gameplay format is very simple, but the graphics are great. The music, the atmosphere is incredible. There have been a few parts where like there's a lot of optional interactions, like press triangle to sleep on the bed. You don't do it to get health back. You don't do it for any other reason besides like, oh, I'm a cat and I want to do this cat thing. Mm-hmm. And like sometimes the game will just like slow down if you decide to take a nap or do whatever, and like this ambient music will kick in. And I don't know who does the soundtrack. I haven't looked it up yet. But it's incredible. Reminds me a bit of like Disaster Pieces music.
Okay.
That's the person who did like the It Follows soundtrack and Fez. I know he wasn't involved with this, but it had some of those vibes going on where, I was talking earlier in this very podcast about having a distinct personality, and they definitely nailed that with Stray. So just fantastic audio.
I was going to say, I've heard the common take with this game being, and I don't exactly know percentage-wise, but they usually 25%, 50% of the way through, people love it, and then you start encountering a lot of, for lack of a better word, dialogue-heavy gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
You start getting NPCs that talk to you, and it seems really out of place because you are literally just a cat.
Yeah, but when it got there, though, it improved for me. Because my complaint before then, it's the moment when it does that is when it opens up a little bit more, and there's actually some exploring to do. So I was on board. And the dialogue isn't too overbearing, too. It's you'll walk up to a robot, they'll have a couple comments to say. It becomes pretty clear, when you're trying to solve a puzzle or figure something out, you kind of get a hint as to, oh, this NPC is just going to say the same thing as everything else. As everyone else, so you can kind of ignore them. So I don't feel like it's too overburdened. It's not like an RPG that goes off the deep end where you're just oh crap, I have to go through tons of dialogue here. It's all pretty quickly paced when you engage with it.
All right.
Okay.
Do you think it will, what at this stage do you think it would do to not get a thumbs up from you, or are you kind of more mid on it?
I'm somewhere. I don't know where I fall yet. I feel like it's a bit mid in some ways, just because, again, very linear puzzle-solving sections. But the atmosphere and graphics are so much fun that it's all right, well, if I don't set, a stupidly high bar for this game where I was, expecting it to be my favorite game or anything, yeah, it's a very fun diversion.
It's an interesting launch title for the PS5, It feels like something that would have, debuted, if you looked back at something the GameCube launch lineup, and it's
right.
Oh, here's a game where you play as a cat. It just doesn't seem
the PS2 library. I miss when Sony used to do that, fucking Mr. Mosquito. Oh my god, I love it when Sony would be so bold. So this is sort of a welcome game for me. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a very simple pitch where it's play as the cat, and the graphics are fantastic, and the game delivers on that front. And the section where I'm at most recently has kind of a stealth type thing, don't get spotted by the evil robot drone things. And I don't know how I feel about this section in particular, because it's it's not that it's super difficult, but I've definitely died and got set back kind of farther than I thought I would, which is a funny complaint to make as someone who's really into the Dark Souls games, because I'm whatever, I'll go to New Launder Ruins from Firelink Shrine, I don't care. I'll do some of those insufferable boss runs and not complain. But in this type of game, I felt just making a dumb mistake here. It's oh, you're gonna send me back 4 minutes? What the hell?
Well, especially since this style of game goes much slower, and it's is it a lot of having to replay dialogue or cutscenes until you can get to the part that you screwed up at?
Thankfully, no. At least it's been very gameplay oriented, but it's still going back multiple sections of puzzles, I guess, or whatever, when you do screw up in certain parts. But yeah, thankfully it's not a lot of plot or cutscenes to sit through by any stretch.
All right. You know what other game has a cat? Jackbox Party Pack 5. And speaking...
Murph, you're getting worse at these segues.
Speaking of Jackbox Party Pack 5, they have a new one that just came out. Now, it's very good that you're here, Illusory, because you're here at the start of DDCast Hardcore Sells Out, because this and one of the other games I'm going to talk about this week, I received review keys for.
I'm so jealous. You go to one PAX and you get shit. I'm mad.
Ever since I went to PAX, my side email has been blowing up, 5 emails a day with people trying to send me promotional stuff. What a terrible problem to have.
Tell us about Jackbox 9.
Well, you played it with me. You were there. So this pack, if you've never done a Jackbox pack, which is... Are there people that haven't? Illusory, have you never done a Jackbox Party Pack? It feels so ubiquitous now with, terminally online people.
I've only ever done, audience participation, so I've never downloaded a Jackbox game. So I haven't played it properly. But just the other night, YouTuber by the name of Keith Ballard, I saw he was live streaming on YouTube. I was oh, what's this? He's playing a Jackbox game, and yeah, I played from the audience perspective a few rounds. These games are brilliant, and I'm always impressed by the shit they come up with. These games are great.
So this is the latest pack. Like any of the others, you get 5 games that you play on your phone with people. Like what's the best innovation of these games is that only one person needs to own it, and then everyone else can just sign in with a room code. In this, you get Fibbage 4, which is more Fibbage. They fixed the Enough About You mode by just taking away the final round, which no one liked, where you had to come up with like a truth and a lie about yourself. And it usually just led to a lot of people doing things like, I've never broken a bone versus I have broken a bone before, and stuff like that. They just cut that out, and it works so much better. Fibbage is still fun. I'll never forget the time Bro and I played that for the first time, and I was winning every round. And then he said to the other people we were playing with, we need to start putting in Murph answers. And the very next round, he and I put in the same answer.
You're predictable, Murph. I can see through the eyes of the Murph, and I know you, so that's why you're co-host.
The other game, Roomerang, which is sort of like... What's difficult about this pack is the games are kind of hard to describe. Roomerang is like supposed to be like a reality TV show setup where you're given a sort of a prompt for a personality you have to imbue. Like, one person's thing was... Well, mine was I received the prompt, hates journaling. So it like says, it will then give everyone like a question, a prompt like, oh, what's your favorite picture in the photo album? And you have to answer as your persona. So I put in, I abstain, photo albums are a form of journaling. And then everyone votes for you to be like kicked off, stay. And if you get kicked off, you come right back with a new personality. It kind of just feels like Quiplash with extra steps. It feels very like something you would enjoy watching like big YouTube Twitch personalities play with all their friends. Not something you'd necessarily enjoy playing with your own group because it kind of sits on everyone adhering to their prompt, And that's just kind of real give or take based on the prompts you get, because literally mine was hates journaling. And I had to stretch to make that work for any of the prompts. The next game is... Hold on, I've got the press release here.
You're pulling... You can't even remember them. I'll say the one I liked...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Were you going to say Quicksort?
Yeah, Quicksort was the best one. Easy. That wasn't even a debate. Yeah. Like the other ones, because there was one where you can say the names by the guide or whatever, but there was one where you like go into the antique store and you are given like a random image and you have to sell the image and you have to convince everybody else that your image is funny, and it works. But there are better versions of the game on other Jackbox packs.
Yeah, Junktopia is that one where basically you're doing like antiquing or Pawn Stars, where you'll be given an item and you have to come up with like a funny backstory for that item. Then you have to verbally pitch that item to the rest of the group. And again, it's one that sort of depends on the group you're with, whether you have like a lot of theater kids with you who are just going to like start putting out funny voices and things to say. But if you're not with a group that's good at that sort of improv, then it can easily like just feel boring and derail.
We wouldn't want to derail this podcast now, would we?
No. Then there's Quicksort, and Quicksort is a lot of fun. It's basically like the trivia game of the pack. I guess Fibbage kind of is, but they always have two. Quicksort is it will divide your group into teams, and then those teams have to take turns putting things on like a timeline. Or
order.
Yeah.
So like one of the ones we got instead of a timeline was the different sizes of diameter for a ball. So then it'd be like, oh, a basketball or a golf ball or a bocce ball, and you're like, what's a bocce? And then another person on your team goes, it's bigger than this, and I was like, no, it's totally smaller than that. And you got to do it within a certain amount of time. I love it.
My favorite prompt that the other team got was, what's the order of Kanye's infamous 2011 VMA speech? Where you have to like put in the individual sentences like, yo, Taylor, and then someone else will get like one of the best videos of all time. And it's great because everyone's shouting at each other like, go more left, go more left, go more right, and stuff like that. It's a great fun game. I don't think the pack is worth it just for that. Like, part of the issue is that this is Jackbox Party Pack 9, and if you're like me, you've bought all of these on release. So when it comes time to, like, get a group together and be like, we're going to play Jackbox, it's like, all right, well, what game do you want to play? At this point, we have 20. So it just...
Yeah, but then people will probably say, like, people will probably pull this one out for the fibbage and for the quick store. That being said, you didn't even mention the monkey one, but don't bother mentioning
the monkey one's bad. The monkey one is painful. It's bad.
Wait, so what's the game where because I just realized now, like, I actually don't know what version or pack that was being used in that stream, but there's one where it's like you have to draw an image and then you'd rate on a scale like how much it is of one of two different things.
Oh, that's the monkey one.
That is
okay.
the monkey one.
That's nonsense.
The monkey one was great, I thought. I loved it because it was there was one where it was like how much is it a dolphin or a shower, and just like seeing the drawings that people came up with was just absolutely ridiculous. It was like a dolphin taking a shower, and it's like, oh shit, like I don't know where to put that on the scale. I guess it's in the middle.
That may go into the spectator thing that Murph was talking about, where it's probably really fun for a spectator. Because like what happened with us was like we would get like giraffe to human, and then there would be a weird scale. And for a lot of people who can't draw or whatever, like I think it may have been frustrating for some of us.
I got what's a 6 between bagpipes and jigsaw puzzle.
Oh god, yeah. How the hell do you draw
So it's
that?
a lot of like, a lot of people for the first 30 seconds of the round going like, how the hell do I even? And just getting mad at the game. Because a lot of it just feels like guessing.
Gotcha.
I can see,
that makes sense. From the audience though,
yeah.
it's good.
I can see what the devs were thinking of. Like, on paper, yeah, something where you're picking things between a scale. That's a very good game idea. I think this just needed a little more refinement.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't remember any specific examples, but I remember a few of them just seemed a little, it was like what could they have done there? And, it's just kind of like, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
okay.
The other
game... Are
game...
you ready for Last Hero of Nostalgia?
It's pronounced Nostalgaia.
Oh, it's like a fantasy play on words.
Yes. Okay, so this is a video game satire done in the style of Dark Souls 1. I see the pitch going around for this being like, it's like if Stanley Parable was a Dark Souls game. And now that I've played a bit more of the game, I don't really agree with that. It does have like a comedy British narrator, but he really fades out after like the tutorial area. Like he'll every now and again pop in to like throw a train at you. The premise is that it's this land of Nostalgaia where where it's sort of like kind of implied to be like an MMO world or like an open world fantasy where the heroes have been ignoring the main objective for so long that the NPCs have gotten sick of heroes taking advantage of them, and this has also resulted in the world starting to decay in the form of the graphics getting lower fidelity. So, like, people are turning from, like, fully detailed 3D models into, like, 2D 16-bit sprites. And you are summoned as a stick figure to go out and restore fidelity of the world by tracking down the other heroes and killing them. And along the way, you have a comedy British narrator who, like, undermines all your actions because he can't believe that a stick figure is the hero of this story.
Huh.
Now that...
I mean, that sounds great.
Yes.
Yeah, you're selling me.
So, like, everything, like, conceptually, like, the writing, the presentation of everything is really good, like, surprisingly good for this game. Because, video game parodies and satires are something that a lot of people can't do well. Particularly a Souls-like. And this game is very Dark Souls 1 in combat. Like, that's, like, I wouldn't even say, like, oh, it's a Souls-like. No, it's a Dark Souls 1-like. That's what the combat feels like to me. And I am notoriously not a fan of Dark Souls 1. So, like, my Bloodborne Elden Ring reflexes served me, like, no favors here. This game is very slow and methodical in its combat.
This is all good news for me. I'm
yeah, I was gonna say
slow.
I'm most at home. Yeah, I'm most at home in Dark Souls 1 out of all of them. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Right.
what this game, what's kind of neat about this game is all your weapons and armor. Number one, they're all references. Like, immediately, like the first weapon you pick up, this is how I knew this game was like designed to pander to me. The first weapon you pick up is a blade with a serrated edge called the Keysmith's Serrated Blade. And I was like, oh, it's a key blade. So all your weapons have memories that you need to unlock, and that upgrades them. That makes them from low res to high res and gives them a special ability and better stats. So the thing for the Keyblade, the Keysmith's Serrated Blade, is it will say, oh, my hero made a lot of friends and traveled to many worlds, but at the end of it, he plunged me into the heart of an evil old man. And wouldn't you know it, like, in the area you find it, there's, like, an old man NPC, and if you hit him with that blade, that unlocks its true potential. And all your items are like that. Some of the items I'm picking up feel like they're such specific references that, like, I was expecting very boilerplate video game references, but it's clearly not. Like you find the Soul Reaver in this game, which feels like a rather dated reference, you know? Like, yeah, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, that's a pretty big franchise, but also it hasn't had a new entry in however long. There's another one, like, you find what I'm fairly certain is supposed to be Barney Calhoun's security guard outfit as armor.
Oh, wow.
I'm
okay.
about this. You're selling me, Murph. This game sounds good.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, I've only beaten, like, the first two areas. And, like, the first area seems to be, like, a parody of, like, WoW gold farmers. It's called The Grinder, and it's a lot of, like, default first, like, character-created, like, characters just mining in a gold farm. And it feels like this game is has like more to it than just like lol video game reference. And that's kind of what keeping me going forward, because like I said, I'm not that too into the gameplay. But it does feel like the devs and the writer have more, like, something to say at the end of this, and I'm very curious what that is.
So it's got a good satirical edge.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, is this like a Steam only, or is this actually on consoles too, or?
I think the key I got was Steam, but I feel like it probably, like, this feels like a Game Pass game, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Last Hero of Nostalgaia, Xbox One, Microsoft Windows, Xbox Series X and Series S.
Ooh.
So
okay,
yeah, it's
cool.
probably on Game Pass.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't have an Xbox, but I mean, I can just play it on computer, so I'll just do that anyways, most likely. But yeah, that's cool. I think I'm kind of sold. I'm definitely curious enough to see what it's all about.
Yeah, the one thing that's worrying to me is that when I played this at PAX, I was like, oh, this is going to be like the game du jour when it comes out, you know, the game of the week for people to like pull a reference, like talk about on Twitter and stuff. And the fact that I haven't really seen that much fan reaction to it is worrying to me. Like, maybe it's not making as big a splash as I hope. But I do want to finish it. I do want to see, like, more of where the game goes. Yeah.
We shall see. Speaking of splashes and Game Pass,
Speaking of people talking about things on Twitter.
Yeah. I disagree with most people on Twitter. I don't know their full takes. I've heard some people's takes. So I'm going to say my experience. Scorn is a first-person puzzle game. Atmospheric. There's a little light element of shooting. You do have guns in the game, but it is mostly a puzzler. It's short. What I liked about it was obviously the atmosphere is very alien inspired. It's H.R. Giger stuff, very like robot alien sexual like horror, and it really works. I don't know what's going on in the story. Like, I don't know the deep lore. There's not, really any of that. So it's a very audio visual experience for me. I still enjoyed it in that sense. I think what gets people hung up is two things. Number one, the quality of the puzzles. When Illusory, when you were talking about Stray, it was ringing bells in my head for Scorn, because especially when it comes to prompts. So like, there's this big whole like spaceship or building and you're walking around it. And I'm walking around basically looking for a button prompt a lot of times.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And then the biggest puzzles are going to be either me trying to hit those button prompts in the right order, or slider puzzles. Literally slider puzzles.
Oh no. The lowest form of puzzle.
Is a maze the lowest form of puzzle, or is a slider puzzle the lowest form
mazes are a crutch. Slider puzzles are the lowest form of puzzle.
Okay, all right. Well, there's that. I still enjoy the puzzles. They don't get in the way of the audio-visual experience, so that's positive. But it's definitely lacking when you get to a puzzle and you go, oh, this is what it is. Okay, whatever. You sort of roll your eyes at it. The thing that really gets people hung up and what gets people complaining is when you start to get a gun and start encountering creatures. Now, I'm going to defend this game. This game's creature encounters are not bad. This is just not a first-person shooter. It's a horror game. It'd be much more like a Silent Hill, and even then, Silent Hill has more ammo than this game. You know what I mean? So, like, this is a scenario where a lot of times the enemies will have their own routes and patterns. And the game wants you, or at least the way I played it and the way that I had the least amount of difficulty with it, was to respect the enemies, give them space, and then and it allows you to pay attention to their, creature movements and stuff and see how they function in the world. So there's a sort of atmospheric element to that. But then, they can crawl into a vent or whatever, and then you can go about your merry way. There are some times where you have to use a gun, and those are very punishing, because if you die, they hit hard and you die fast. And the healing and ammo pickups are very few and far between. I think what this game needs, though, is not more health pickups or retuned shooting elements. I think what this needs is better save elements, because you can't actually save in the game. They only save at certain checkpoints, and they're very rare. There's about 2 or so per level, and otherwise you restart at the level itself. So, like, I would recommend them just retool the saves.
So does it auto-save, or is there like a Geiger machine you can like plug your dick into and that saves you?
I think there is not a Geiger machine you can plug your dick into. I'm saying that a Geiger machine you can plug your dick into would make the game better. It is literally an auto-save, but it saves like once every 30 minutes.
That is brutal.
Yes.
If you could do like I finished a puzzle, let me backtrack to the save point and save there. That would be. That sounds like that would be more better.
Well, then the other issue becomes, like, because it's an autosave thing, you don't dictate the saves. So then let's say you get to a point where you've been okay, you've been able to scrounge, and you've got like a quarter health left, and you've been able to do a puzzle or two, and it autosaves, and then you die at a really hard encounter, and then it loads back to the autosave, and there's no health pickups between you and that encounter. Oof. You may have to roll back another save.
Oof.
Which is the real issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see that being the big point of contention for a lot of people. So then when they play, they get frustrated. They go in thinking it's like a Doom thing or a Half-Life, and they're shooting the animals, and they're going like, why am I being punished so hard for this? But I think it's a mentality thing, personally. The game's not amazing, though. I would say that it's a good thing it's on Game Pass. If you're curious about it and you have Game Pass, check it out. Otherwise, I would do a soft no.
Is there anything to really indicate why it took like 8 years to develop?
It's visually very impressive. Visually, it is a treat. So I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say it was in the full-on game design, but it looks very pretty. So maybe it was that. Who knows?
Yeah, definitely, like, the discourse around this 100% seems people thinking that this was a Doom game for the longest time. Because I remember when that, you remember Agony from 2018? I had to look this up. The game where you're, like, are in hell. People got mad at that game. Number one, because it was poorly made. But number two, because it was effectively one of those walking sim horror games where you can only run from monsters. And I remember discourse around that being like, well, I guess we'll have to wait for Scorn for a fight through hell. And it's like, I'm looking at all the marketing material for Scorn. At no point do they, like, say this is a Doom game. It always seemed to be like this is a first-person Oddworld, you know?
No. Soft disrecommend. I don't recommend it unless you have Game Pass. Otherwise, yeah. It's not bad, though.
Is it worthwhile watching someone else play? If you just find a long play.
Honestly, maybe. But then again, like, in my head, personally, the big appeal of it is like, if you watched Alien, it'd be like walking into the engineer room and then being like, wow, look at all this shit. And then being able to do that yourself. I think Alien Isolation is also a better version of that. But,
Okay.
you know, there's a sort of immersion. I would always recommend playing a game over watching it, almost always. But yeah, maybe. Anyways, Murph, you've played Faith, the Unholy Trilogy.
Yes, I have. This is one of the best releases of the year. Probably top 5 for me. Maybe even top 3. I'd need to look at all the games that came out this year. If you don't know what Faith is, it's a series of indie horror titles by this guy Erdorf, done in the style of an Atari game, but a plot revolving around like 1980s satanic panic. And in it, you only really have 2 mechanics. You can walk around, and you can press a button to pull out your crucifix and repel demons. And that's the gameplay, and with minimal gameplay, minimal visuals, this dev does so much variety of encounter, of puzzles, of just, like, visuals of different kinds of demons and cultists. This game is an audio-visual treat. I want everyone to go play it, so we get more weird, wonderful horror games like this, and fewer, like, walking down a dark corridor with a flashlight and there's, like, a ghoulie you can't look at.
Oh, man, yeah, I'm looking up screenshots of this, because I haven't seen anything from this before.
I was surprised, because everything you were talking about
awesome.
with, like, Amiga sound design and stuff, I think you would love this game a lot.
Yeah, no, this is completely...
That literally, the, like, there's voice acting in the game, but it's all, like, Microsoft Sam.
Yeah, no, this is everything I'm looking at, like the style of the artwork. I'm looking at like a picture of the way the house is drawn from the outside, or chapel, I guess. It's just, yeah, strong early computer game vibes here. This looks awesome.
And I don't want to like undermine, like, the game is scary. The game does have some great horror moments in chapter 3 especially, because chapters 1 and 2 were available on itch.io and I've played them before. This is like chapter 3 came out as part of the trilogy. And Chapter 3 is the longest one, and it has just some of the best, like, some of the stuff makes me crawl. There's, like, a part where you have to, like, go to the top of this apartment complex that's filled with cultists, and you get to a dumbwaiter, and you have to give up your crucifix in order to unlock the path forward. So you have, like, no demon repellent, and you're, like, walking down the halls, like, knowing at any moment, like, demons, cultists are going to burst out. The power goes out. So you're surrounded in darkness. You can just see your guy. You pick up a camera with a flash bulb. And now your crucifix button is the flash bulb button. So you only get, like, a brief glimpse at the area around you as you have to walk. It's so good. It's so well done. And even if you've played Faith 1 and 2, the trilogy is still worthwhile because this comes with bonus mode and all sorts of, like, extra content that you get through beating the games again and again. Wholly worthwhile. There's big thumbs up from Murph.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check this out. Actually, so this isn't, like, in the show notes at all, but I want to share a story about some weird Amiga game that I played as a kid. It would be perfect for the Halloween timing of this episode. Yeah, so this is a weird thing that, like, so I played this game on the Amiga as a kid called Boo. That's BOO exclamation mark. It was not a very good game, but the weird thing about it is that you can't find anything about it. You won't, like, I've looked up, like, databases of, like, Amiga computer games, there's no reference. You can't find this anywhere. And so my dad back in the day was part of some like Amiga user group type things where they would like actually like get together and like disc swap and stuff like that. So I think it's some like homemade game that like shareware type stuff that like
something
just
like a
doesn't just like a homemade indie game from back in the day that has like no record. So I'm just like, oh god, like I still have a lot of those old Amiga discs, but I'm just like, I need to find that because like I think it's lost to time. Like the internet does not have a copy of it, and it's not a very
that would be super important to preserve. Yes,
and it's not a very good game. The things I can remember is that, and again I was being reminded from the visuals, although let me stress that Boo was not nearly as cool, but it was like very much like all black background type thing. I think it had a difficulty selector, and it was very much like an Atari like maze kind of game. It's kind of you just like go through the environment, maybe find a key that opens a door. The graphics are incredibly basic, but every now and again I think there'd be just like really simple audio samples of just like you run into a ghost and it's like boo and you die or something like that, and it's like just like really cheesy. But it's just frustrated me because I remember like thinking about it a couple years ago, but like, oh, what happened to that game? And like trying to find a copy of it. I'm like, fuck, this doesn't exist anywhere. Like someone like made that game in their house and like swapped it, like added some disc swap way back in the day.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe there's like 20 people who've ever played it or something. Who knows? I don't know.
I had an
technically
incident
lost
like that.
media, dude. I am so fascinated by lost media. I always keep up with that shit. Most of the time, it's always a cartoon or like a VHS tape of something. But oh my gosh, video games. Ugh.
And how often it's
maybe
like discovered to
make a video
be
about it.
in like some dude's basement, and he had no idea it was a big deal.
Yeah, they recently had a thing with lost media where it was like a big deal in like LGBT gaming, where it was like this gay RPG.
Gay Blade or. Yeah, I watched.
Yeah,
you got that from the Netflix documentary show,
yes,
High Score.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they had that fantastic episode about it where it's just like it was like lost media, but it was recently recovered, which is awesome.
Yeah, and that's why shareware is important. Allowing people to make copies and save games, because corporations will not. We are
exactly
pro Amiga, anti corporation on this show.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, like 100 years in the future, when you're in like your Star Trek, like you just talk to a computer, like, computer, load me this NES game. Like, is that going to load up for you because Nintendo held onto the ROMs? Fuck no. It's going to be there because
then
people.
You gotta look up how to
pirates.
jailbreak your computer AI, and then
install Raspberry Pi.
It's still a Raspberry Pi.
Oh god. All right. Okay. Are we ready for the variety minute, everybody?
I think so. I think we're warmed up and ready to get down with the cold ones.
This week's Variety Minute is vampires in video games. I'm going to state my thesis statement. I think vampires are like the best mythological creature for video games.
You know what? It's hard to disagree. It really is hard to disagree. Sort of something like, I don't know, like zombies. It's, I think what appeals about vampires, and I'm going to make a broad statement here, I think gamers love factions, and vampires are a very worthwhile, not only have their own factions, or just a faction unto themselves for your, like, fantasy RTS game, you know?
They have their own lore, but like to me at least, it's because of the mechanics. It's because like werewolves don't have the fucking bullet point list of mechanics of like you gotta invite them in, and even like garlic in the nighttime.
And even some vampires can turn into wolves. So what do even werewolves have then?
Yeah, exactly.
They got nothing. I think the one I love the most and the one I was excited to talk about for this Variety Minute was Vampire Masquerade: The Bloodlines. Or yeah, whatever. I said that wrong, but whatever. I love that game. It's a great RPG. It is.
Sick. It's probably just, I'm gonna say, my favorite Obsidian RPG.
Is that Obsidian?
I'm fairly certain it's Obsidian, is it not? Or like one of those like Obsidian splinter groups. I swear to God, it shares some DNA with like Obsidian.
I'm sure it does. I'm just fact checking you in front of Illusory
In front
Wall.
of God and Illusory.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think what makes Vampire the Masquerade work is it's less of a vampire sim and more of an Illuminati sim. Because
Yes.
part of the appeal of Vampire the Masquerade is like walking around the human world being like, I have secret knowledge. I can do things they can't. I have the secret Stonecutter's ring that lets me enter the backside of this building where the secret blood market is, and things like that. And that's just great for role-playing. It's great for a feeling of power, but also the fact that it has like 12 distinct playstyles depending on what vampire clan you pick. Like, if you play as a Nosferatu, you're playing an utterly different game. You have to, like, live in the sewers and feed off rats. You can't go out in public.
I fucking love the Nosferatu. Dude, that is my shit.
So I messed up my first playthrough of that game. I was a Malkavian, which is
that's a fuck up.
Which is the insane faction, so they don't get, like, normal text options. Because they speak in, like, riddles and rhymes, and you can do things like have a conversation with a lamppost. So it's something that's more suited for your second time through, where you already know the plot, whereas if you play it through the first time, you're getting a very strange, twisted version of the plot because it's messed up by your character's understanding of the world.
Yes. Yeah. Even Nosferatu, because of the fact that a lot of because you can't go out walking around normally as a Nosferatu. You have to go under the sewers, eat rats, basically, and stay away from public places. Those are fundamentally different experiences than the normal, like, going to nightclubs and doing all that shit. You know what I mean? So, like, but that's one of those nice things is vampires are so flexible in, like, image and mythology. You could have a sexy Gary Oldman, Tom Cruise vampire, or you could have a fucking disgusting Nosferatu. And that's beautiful.
I liked, whenever I would play, like, the Heroes of Might and Magic games, I always loved the Undead faction, probably explicitly because they had vampires, which are, like, one of the most broken units in the game. And it really tickles me greatly seeing them, like, start in Heroes 2 as, like, your stereotypical bleh vampires, and then you get to, like, Heroes 5, and they're, like, reflavored as vampire princes, where they have silver long swords and, like, a man bun. It's one of my favorite units in any, like, turn-based game.
Illusory, do you have any favorite vampires in games?
I'm trying to think, and it's like, I feel like this is a weird corner of gaming that I'm kind of out of touch on, because I'm like, what have I played that has vampires in it that's, like, not Castlevania? And not much is coming to mind, honestly.
Have you played Kid Dracula?
Yes, I played Kid Dracula.
Where does Kid Dracula fall on the vampire power scale?
Totally broken, totally busted.
Absolutely. Okay, so
he's a god.
Yeah. He's OP, yeah.
All right. Well, how do we feel about, like,
it's
Legacy of Kain?
Logic. Oh yeah.
I've never played any of the Legacy of Kain games.
Well, if you go back
weird.
I'm gonna say, episode 39, we played Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain.
For the first time, and we were impressed. We were like, "Oh my god, this game is fucking sick." I would recommend it.
That's a great vampire game because it lets you play into the power fantasy of being this unstoppable, like, just demon with all these different magics, and you're draining people left and right. You could just go into a town of innocent people and suck them all for health boosts.
Wait, I was sorry. I was gonna have to say I did make a mistake. Now, I have played a vampire game, and I'm sure it's at the top of everyone's list. That would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the original
I was
Xbox.
going to bring that up. So are you talking about the GameCube or the Game Boy one?
Original Xbox.
Okay, so I think that's the same one on the GameCube, because I was looking up vampire games, and I saw, there's a Buffy the Vampire Slayer game, and the footage, the screenshots, it just looks like fucking Grabbed by the Ghoulies.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's all I've got.
It's so cartoonish.
Yeah, man, I just remember the only memory I have of that game is, like, just my brothers getting stuck on, like, some stupid environmental puzzle and like calling me into the room, being like, "Hey, get Patrick to play this part. He's good at video games. Like he'll get through it."
Oh, so you were the big brother that'll beat the game.
Okay.
No, I was the little brother that would beat the game. Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Okay, let me ask.
That's embarrassing.
Does Canehurst Manor in Bloodborne count as a vampire level? Like, I would say the hopping fleas out front,
Totally.
which are my least favorite enemy in the entire game. I've never killed a single flea monster.
I legit think Canehurst is like a Castlevania thing. One of my things is like maybe that is the secret reason why I don't dislike Bloodborne. I think it's a good game. It's a great game. And I played it a bunch of times. But like deep down in my heart, I'm like, I want this to be a Castlevania game. And Canehurst is where I get it the most, for sure.
I have a whole thing, like, I've been sitting on this video essay idea for a while. It's going to happen eventually, but the whole pitch of the video is like why Fromsoft should be given the reins to Castlevania. Like, just let them make a Castlevania game.
100%.
Canehurst is like one of the first things that always comes to mind because it's like the most obviously aesthetically Castlevania-like. But and very deservedly so. I'm not going to take that away from Canehurst. But I also feel like the connections go so much deeper that, like, to me, that almost feels like superficial. It's like, oh, like, if you took Castlevania 3 and just took Lothric Castle and made it nighttime, put a big moon in the background, made the textures of the castle, like, a little bit more of, like, a gothic look to it, you could just, like, superficially change it, and that would be, like, one of the most 3D, like, Castlevania games, like, ever made. It's like what a Castlevania game should be.
I do Belmont playthroughs of Dark Souls games. I do miracle builds and whips. I love whips, even in all their jank. Because it's also.
I mean, they've gotten decent. I mean, like the whip was horrible in Dark Souls 1, but like once you're past that, pretty decent.
Yeah, you can power stand, which is great.
How do we feel about
Hell yeah.
How do we feel about like psychic vampires in games? Like, here's what I was. Not necessarily.
What?
Are you not up on like vampire lore and deviations?
I'm sure they have all the powers, but I do not know about the psychic vampire.
Or it's just
like you've got energy vampires.
Yeah, energy vampires. Someone's watched What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, hell yeah.
Real talk. If I was any good at like video editing, my dream is to take footage from What We Do in the Shadows and like put filters over it so it looks like a Sega CD game.
Ooh, yes.
Oh, Night Trap.
Night Trap was at the end of my list. That's the peak of vampire games.
Okay.
Well, sorry, Brogan, if you were up on your Night Trap lore, you would know that they're not vampires, they're Draugr.
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. I don't know Night Trap lore. I'm sorry.
Get it right, man.
Yeah. Damn. What else do you have, Murph, on the list?
What else do I have? Well, when I was getting into what I was talking about with, like, psychic vampire things, things that, like, fuck with your mind and try to, like, drain you, which are, like I'm talking more, like, vampire imagery. And this is a roundabout way of saying, does Psycho Mantis qualify as a vampire-like enemy?
There's literally... Murph, you didn't play because you didn't play Metal Gear Solid 2. There's literally a vampire enemy in Metal Gear Solid.
I do know about that. Because that's one of the things that get, like, brought up. Like, did you know in Metal Gear Solid vampires are real?
But Vamp is also, because I think Kojima answered it with nanomachines. I think he's technically not a vampire.
His name is straight up Vamp?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's due to his sexuality, though. Because I think he's bi. If I know my Kojima Metal Gear Solid...
Being bisexual makes you a vampire?
No, I think vamp is slang for bisexual.
Oh. Well, okay. I mean, vampires are
deep Metal Gear Solid lore now.
Yeah.
What else do we have? Or is that are we done?
Oh, there's hold on. Most famous vampire in video games. Dracula from Castlevania. All right, I guess we're moving on.
I knew it. Yeah.
I think that's as good a place as any. I mean, I'm glad we didn't talk about like Skyrim quests here because I didn't play Skyrim. So, I mean.
Which, to be fair, so I guess if we want to talk generally about vampires in video games before we get into the meat of, like, Castlevania 3, I guess it is kind of funny or worth mentioning that, like, Dracula in Castlevania is basically just an all-around demon.
Mm-hmm. He's a genuine demon.
Yeah, I've never really looked at the Castlevania games as like a vampire experience, because there's no like lore of like, you know, you get the tropes of like, oh, here's like a cross and here's holy water and stuff like that, but it's not like you ever have to like stake the vampire to kill it, you know?
I guess
so it's very just like,
is there any Castlevania game where you kill it with sunlight?
I don't think that's a thing anywhere in any of them.
Okay.
Who knows if one of the why am I forgetting the name of that freaking series? The one that, you know, the 3D games that they weren't made by IGA anymore.
Lords of Shadow?
Lords of Shadow. Yeah.
Do you think people don't like Lords of Shadow because it reminds people of more, like, not literally, but it gives off Morbius vibes? I think that's my problem with Lords of Shadow.
Oh,
it
in
gives,
my
like,
list,
a weird stench.
Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, you can play as Morbius. That's a vampire game.
There you go. Hell yeah.
Oh god, but to talk Castlevania real quick on it, I think Dracula is like a sorcerer type thing, like a necromancer thing, because like it's more framed like, oh, he controls the undead and he is Death's boss. I think Alucard is pretty vampire.
I think
yes,
Dracula in Castlevania is more in line with Dracula in the books, in that he is kind of just like a genuine demon with all these weird powers. And then, like, a vampire is something that became much more refined post-Dracula. Particularly in books like Vampire spelled with a Y. Which I think also had, like, a recent game adaptation. But, like...
I don't know my vampire
Dracula
lore.
in the books... book, singular. It does have, like, all this weird shit. Like, you like, being staked in the heart, like, they do that to Dracula and he just walks it off. They have to, like, cut his head off with an iron sword, stuff his neck with garlic, like, all this elaborate stuff to actually kill him. And no, like, adaptation has ever gotten that right.
Damn.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
There we go. I think it's time for the game of the week, y'all. I think we're ready.
All right.
Our game of the week is Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, for the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System, released in 1989 in Japan and 1990 in the US. In 1476, Count Dracula has ravaged Europe with horrifying undead monsters. The disgraced monster-hunting Belmont clan has been invited back to murder Dracula. Ralph Belmondo in Japanese, but Trevor Belmont in English, is the hero who holds the infamous vampire kill and is tasked with the mission. He plays just like his future successor, Simon does. It's simple 2D action only. The levels are more complicated. There's different routes within the levels, and also level progression can be decided as a choice in some circumstances. More important, you have 3 optional partners with which you can choose to join you. You can only have one partner at a time, but your choices are Sypha. Is it Sypha or Sypha? Anyways, a sorceress who is pretty...
Sypha Belnatus.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Netflix guy. A sorceress who is pretty weak and immobile, but has really good spells. Grant Dynasty. Please, sir, Mr. Dynasty was my father's name. A pirate who is small and quick and can climb walls and ceilings. And Alucard, son of Dracula himself, who can shoot little balls and turn into a bat. With that, they go onward. The goal is simple. Kill Dracula. What did y'all think of this game?
Illusory, you're the guest.
Sure. So I love this game. Although it's a tricky thing to talk about in retrospect, because, like, if you haven't played too many platformers of that era, it could be a really hard recommendation, because the game is incredibly difficult. Takes a lot of patience to get through. The controls are pretty stiff by modern standards. Like when Belmont jumps, you can't change his jump mid-air.
You can change Grant's.
You can change Grant, yes.
Yes, continue.
But so by the standards of modern games, like, it could be hard to go back to in some ways. By the standards of the NES, it is an absolutely fantastic game. I'm going to have plenty of positive things to say about the soundtrack. Again, that's just, like a short list of like, oh, what are NES games you should play if you're exploring that platform? This is easily on that list, no questions.
Yep, one of the best Castlevanias, not just to play, period, but also I think it's very influential. I think after Simon's Quest, they took a step back and they re-examined what they wanted out of Castlevania. So then they brought it back to its roots, and then they were like, well, what if we made unique stage options, and then we made unique characters? And I think that really works out in spades. There's times where it could be less polished than... I think Castlevania 1 is a super tight experience, but Castlevania 3 is really influential to the franchise and is just really fun on its own, for sure.
Oh yeah, I should clarify that it is one of my favorite Castlevania games too. I have to pick Symphony of the Night. It's kind of like an obvious pick for a lot of people. I think that's my favorite. Of the classic Vanias and not Metroidvanias, Castlevania 1 is the one that I've played the most. That's the game that, like, I can play on autopilot. Like, I've really, really memorized that game with precision.
It's so short,
like,
too. It's simple.
It's so short and simple. 3, though, in a lot of ways, there's things I kind of like more about it than some of the stuff offered from the 16-bit generation, which might be a controversial opinion. Like, I know a lot of people love Super Castlevania 4, and I was always kind of like, I don't know, kind of missed the mark. Bloodlines, I think, is aesthetically awesome. I love, like, there's a lot of things I love about the Sega Genesis Castlevania. But I don't know. Something about the soundtrack, it's Konami's firing on all cylinders at this point in their timeline of NES soundtracks. It just sounds fantastic. And again, even though it's stiff by modern standards, like, of the NES library, if you want to play a pretty refined platformer, yeah, it's got some BS and some kind of weird stuff in it. It's just a very solid game.
I think my favorite classic Vania, which I think I prefer generally more than the Metroidvanias, although I will also say Castlevania 3 is Koji Igarashi's favorite Castlevania, so bonus points there. I think it's probably either... I go back and forth between Rondo of Blood, and I agree, Castlevania 4 is, like, kind of mid. I'm blanking out now. Castlevania Chronicles redid the X68000 one, and I really like Castlevania Chronicles, man. I'm super about it. I don't know why. It's just a good vibe for me.
Yeah, I'm a big Castlevania fan in general. Again, with the 3D games, that's where I start getting a lot more like picky, and I have my whole rant about why Fromsoft would be the perfect fit for that. But yeah, when it comes to Metroidvania, Classic Vania, I just have a deep, deep love for a lot of these entries, so whether we're talking Symphony of the Night, Castlevania 1, Castlevania 3, hell, there's stuff about Castlevania 2 I love. This is a series that, before the Souls games, I would have called my favorite series, I think, actually. So yeah, it's just very near and dear to my heart.
Damn. All right, Murph, tell us what you thought about this game.
So my first time playing this, as far as, like, Castlevania games, I've only beaten one, and I got, like, 50% of the way through Castlevania X. I don't really know where that file's on the timeline.
Dracula X, the Super Nintendo game?
Sure, yes. There's an X in the title.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of like the Super Nintendo remake of Rondo of Blood.
That's what I was thinking. Okay.
That's probably what it is, yeah.
But this is, as of right now, probably my favorite Castlevania of those 1.5. It's probably also one of my favorite NES games I've played in a while. I just like the NES Castlevania games, much in the same way. A while back, I talked about, like, why I like Bloodborne over, like, other FromSoft games, and because to me Bloodborne feels mathematical in a way. Every encounter is like, all right, I can I can kill this guy in 2 hits consistently. Consistency is the key, and I can go up here and kill this guy in 3. Boom, boom, boom. This and very much feels the same way, where it's like, all right, I have all the information I need on screen. This guy's going to go down in 1 hit. I jump the gap. I duck the fireball, whip the Medusa head. Everything's Gucci. We're moving it at a good clip. I think as far as like anything that's outdated to me is, I think, are just kind of like more quality of life stuff. Like I feel like I need more plentiful health pickups would be nice, particularly like before a boss, because if I do have a complaint with this game, it's a lot of the bosses. But otherwise, I had a great time with this. I love games that give you multiple playable characters, and each one is kind of broken in their own way. I'm very pro devs letting you break the game if it comes at the cost of like a later bit that's going to be hard.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, whether that means just like climbing over a wall to skip a section, or just like fly around some obstacle with Alucard. It's just like, yep, I'm going to abuse every opportunity where you allow that.
That said, Japanese Grant looks supremely busted in comparison to every other character in the game.
Yeah, so the difference with Grant is that in the Japanese version, he can, and which I haven't played the Japanese version very much compared to the NES version, but I do know the main difference with him is that he has a projectile attack by default. In the NES game, he can get 2 sub-weapons. He can get the throwing knife or the throwing axe, but his default attack is just like a little swipe with his dagger that doesn't extend very far. But in the Japanese version, he has the throwing knife by default. It doesn't use hearts. That's just his main attack. And then you can get the axe as
and
the
being
sub-weapon.
Able to,
it's like,
stack that with the axe.
That's huge.
Yeah, because you get Alucard, and I was like, oh my god, I have a projectile attack in an NES Castlevania. This is gonna be so broken. It's not. It's a trick. The fireballs do so little damage, and every enemy's just capable of rushing you before you can get off the needed number of hits. I regretted switching.
It's time to defend. It's time to defend Alucard real quick. No.
He can fly. I did figure out how to fly.
No, I got a lot of mileage out of it. Okay, the bottom of the spread shot sucks, and yes, there is like no damage, but I get a lot of mileage out of the that upward diagonal shot, because that's just really useful, man. Technically, you could use the axe, but like that takes hearts, man. Hearts are hard to come by. It's a currency.
Hearts are important. Man. Oh, absolutely, hearts are very important. I think as a general like gameplay flow thing, it's like, the thing that really makes a difference on whether or not you're just like on the struggle bus constantly or not, it's like whether or not you maintain a sub weapon you want and are able to like use it effectively. And that's the big kicker, is like if you die in the middle of a level and the midpoint of the level is like too far past the sub, it's like, oh, you'd have to be earlier in the level to get the holy water. There's times in these games where if I die once, I'll just walk into a pit several times in a row to get a game over. I'm like, no, I want to go all the way back so I can get that sub weapon I want.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, so real, what's your favorite sub weapon in Castlevania?
Oh, holy water, without a doubt.
My man.
So it's not as broken as it is in Castlevania 1. In Castlevania 1,
it's very busted.
I will use it on literally every single boss in Castlevania 1, even the bat. It's like, oh, it's an aerial boss. You'd think you'd want to throw, like, axes at it or whatever. It's like, no.
It's all about that stun lock.
It's all about the stun lock. You just, like, walk up to a block that, like, the bat will fly into and just, like, throw holy water at it. And then the boss, like, will literally never be able to fight back at any point. My strategy for Castlevania 1 is literally carry water 100% of the time. In the last level, I'll pick up the stop clock to make a few like those flea men being dropped by like those flying enemies that get kind of dicey in that area of right before Dracula. But then there's a holy water right by Dracula again, so it's just like, yeah, I keep that the whole game. Castlevania 3, it's not nearly as busted, and there's some bosses where it's incredibly busted still. But yeah, it feels like it feels like the strongest choice, where it's like,
it feels like they knew the holy water was busted, so their compensation was like, all right, every boss flies.
Yeah, they don't want you to be able to stun lock them as easily, or just, to like land all of those hits constantly. But it's just the best sub. Symphony of the Night. Like, if you're early in the game and there's those tall enemies, kind of like in that not the long hallway, but there's that one section where there's like the guy with the iron ball and chain, and there's that one demon that like spits fireballs at you. And it's like, if you're not too familiar with the game yet, those enemies could actually be kind of tricky. They have like high damage relative to where you are, but it's like, oh, if you just have holy water, just stand next to them, spam it, they're dead. Not even like an obstacle. It's the best sub weapon.
See, for classic Vania, I mean, obviously, if like for one, holy water's busted. I don't know, man. I'm one of those visual people that when I play Castlevania, I engross myself in it. I am Trevor Belmont when I'm playing it. So like I imagine myself in all 8-bit glory, and also Trevor has a fantastic ass. I don't know if y'all noticed, but he's got some cake going on. Anyways, I love the crosses. I love throwing the crosses and then whipping, and like it's just so satisfying. So like when I was able to like beat the first phase of the Grim Reaper in like a fucking second, because I just threw the fucking cross, it came back, it fucking wrecked his shit, and I just whipped him. Oh, it just felt so good.
Even though I've got my like soft spot, my affinity for holy water, cross would be my next pick easily. Holy water, to make some arguments against it, not very great on Dracula.
No.
That final form, it does like no damage to like his third stage. It's just very weak, and it's like, man, you want the cross for that. You don't want holy water for that. And again, for Castlevania 1, when I consciously did a run where it's like, all right, I exploit the hell out of holy water, so let me do a run where I don't use holy water. And my main gimmick was just to max out the cross. And it was like, it is the next best weapon for sure.
100%. Yeah, because like I can't even imagine like actually fighting like second form Dracula Castlevania 2 without holy water, or fighting fucking Grim Reaper. I think Grim Reaper's actually the hardest fucking fight in Castlevania 1 without a fucking
yeah, I remember. So I was at this I don't really go too often anymore, but I used to go to this convention a lot called MagFest, this video game convention, and they had a really cool challenge like booth set up where it was like just a bunch of computers set up with emulators, and it was kind of like try to do the challenges, like check off, like see how many you can do. I don't remember if they were like giveaways for it, but they had one where it's like an emulator with a save state set up at Dracula, and it was literally, you don't have any upgrades. It was like, can you beat, or not Dracula, at Death, and it was like, can you beat Death just with the basic starting short whip and no sub weapons? And like I tried a bunch of times, and I did not get through it. And it's like, Castlevania 1's a game I've beaten without dying. I've once beat it without getting hit. But it's all about the holy water exploit. I tried like 10 times probably and just gave up. I was like, fuck, this is too hard.
If the Netflix series is to be believed, all you need to beat Death is the dagger.
Okay.
If only.
What do y'all think about, because we haven't talked about Sypha or the alternate level branches yet. What are your all opinions on that?
Sypha is probably, I only played a bit of her today, but I think she is probably my favorite of the alternate characters, like her, Grant, and Alucard. Because you know what? It's fun to be a wizard. It feels like the other two feel complementary to Trevor. Sypha feels like she's in her own game, and that's the fun.
Yeah, and it feels good to wreck shit, yeah.
My whole thing with the branching paths, I guess I didn't articulate this point as now that I think about it more, when I was talking about like not feeling as keen on the 16-bit games as much. It's like in that middle era of games, I feel like they're missing something, right? And the something they were missing was like kind of the big leap to Metroidvania. You know, not necessarily that Metroidvania is better than Classicvania, because I love all of these games. But like when I played Castlevania 3, it felt like, again, it was a return to like what they wanted to do with the games coming back from Castlevania 2. But the branching paths at least was something new and interesting. When you get to like Super Castlevania 4, it's kind of like multi-directional whipping, I guess. And that always felt like a bit of just kind of like oh man, you were doing something cooler with Castlevania 3. It's like they got more basic. They sort of regressed in a way, and it's kind of, they didn't figure out that next leap until Metroidvanias, I feel like.
Well, yeah, and it definitely like ruined the 8-directional whipping of Castlevania 4 has cool moments, like with the mode 7, twirling, with the grapple and stuff. But then it loses so much in counter design by losing out on the sub weapons, whatever. But for me, one of the reasons why I like Rondo, and one day we will do a Rondo of Blood episode, is because I feel like this Rondo of Blood is like a spiritual successor to this, particularly with the branching paths, because Rondo puts the branching paths into the level where it's like a secret, and then you have a secret boss to fight and shit. Like, I love that. It's just so great for me. But yes, I can definitely see that there's like weird no link there. It's almost as if they abandoned 3 for a lot of Bloodlines or Super Castlevania 4.
Absolutely.
For me, if I had like grown up with this game or even just had more time with it, I could definitely feel myself growing more affinity for certain levels. And when you get to like that branching path, it's like, oh no, I gotta do the top path because then I get to go to the pirate ship level and things like that. Or like, oh no, I don't want to go through the level with like the wall dragon bone snakes. That level sucks.
That part is so hard. Yeah, it having that option of pathing just felt like it was something that was more interesting to me than the console. The ones that were available here stateside. Rondo is great. Rondo is super cool. But yeah, it gave Castlevania 3 something that I thought the next couple of games were missing.
100%. Dude, let's talk sound, because there's a huge sound difference.
Oh yes, man. I could talk about the audio all day. So I'll try to keep it quick. Yeah, so for those who are not familiar, the original Japanese version of Castlevania 3 had sound expansion audio. This is something we didn't get on the NES at all. There were no American or European NES games that had expansion audio. The way it worked is inside the cartridge itself, it has an extra chip in there that can produce additional audio, and it just routes it through the console. So you have the original 5 sound channels of the NES and Famicom, plus 3 additional sound channels coming out of the cartridge itself directly. And of course it mixes to your TV, so it comes from one sound source in the end. Yeah, really cool thing that the Famicom was capable of. The NES, with like a tiny modification, can do it as well. So the consoles themselves are very similar underneath the hood. It's the same console for all intents and purposes, but just a minor difference. The end user never got to hear extra audio channels. It's really cool. It offered 2 extra sound channels of pulse waves, you could call them. That's a fancy way of saying like square waves, but also rectangle waves, like where it might not be a perfect square in shape. And then also a sawtooth wave was like the 3rd extra sound channel they added, which has a very buzzy, bassy sound that's like very heavy and thick. And yeah, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, what I like is sort of... I like the boss music, and it's not even really the full track. It's that first, like that because that is like the most perfect, like, oh shit, here we go again music as like the boss reveals itself, and then it just escalates from there. And of course, like the original like Castlevania theme, that's one of my favorite NES tracks. I'll just put that on whenever I'm fighting like a tough From boss, because it really pumps you up. Like you said at the start, it's very funky. In fact, Castlevania is a surprisingly funky series.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's like hard to describe the genre. It's like, well, if you want to have a classic NES Castlevania sound, it's got to be like funk, baroque pop, I guess. Yeah. It's like, it's a mishmash of these different elements.
And then I assume as like, because like I said, I've only played 1, 3, and half of X, but I assume like Symphony of the Night, they start leaning more like orchestral from that point on.
They branch off. Symphony of the Night is it's a great soundtrack. Very weird in a lot of ways, though. Yeah, it's a very diverse soundtrack. There's some songs with electric guitar and shredding on them. There's other songs that are just like kind of like ambient synth melodies that are like pretty chill.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be into that. All right.
Yeah, it's a bit all over the map, but not in a bad way. It's a great soundtrack. So I can't stress enough too, like, this is when Konami, for going back to Castlevania 3, this is when Konami was really firing on all cylinders with their NES sound design. There's a sort of narrative when you talk about the 2 different versions of the soundtrack, like, it's awesome to go back to the Japanese version and hear the bigger, fuller version of the soundtrack, but the NES version of the soundtrack is absolutely fantastic as well. It's not a case of like, oh, it's missing a bunch of sound channels, so it totally sucks. There's other games that happen with, like Gimmick is a Famicom game that has a really great soundtrack, but if you play the European version that doesn't have expansion audio, it's just like, it's clearly missing. It sounds terrible. But Castlevania 3, it's like both versions of the soundtrack, they really put their hearts into the soundtrack. It's a weird window of time where like Konami today, like everyone's just like, oh, that's the company that doesn't care about their games, you know, like they don't put effort into making quality games. It's just about licensing the IPs occasionally, making pachinko machines, you know, because Konami makes more money elsewhere.
Yep. Or
but there's that window
of slot machine. Sorry.
Exactly.
Hit the lever.
But there's this period of time in the early 90s, late 80s where like the developers really gave a shit. And like the you know, and as a company they gave them the time and funding to do this stuff. I guess going away from Castlevania 3 for a second, Castlevania 2 that originally came out on the Famicom disk system. It was a floppy disk system for the game for the Famicom. When they brought it to the US a year later, they didn't just like redo the soundtrack because it was missing one sound channel, but they redid the sound design at an extreme level where like they went all out with it and like tried to make it better than the original soundtrack. And it's like, wow, like why do they care so much about the audio? It's a really weird thing to hear when you like compare the two soundtracks, and it's like, damn, Konami just really fundamentally cared about having good soundtracks to their Castlevania games. And I think that's why they're remembered today as like, oh, what's like, you know, what are some great NES game soundtracks? Like everyone's gonna say Castlevania like right away.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the big things is I always think of it like this because I particularly like Capcom. Like I'm a huge Mega Man guy as well, so like I love the Mega Man songs. Oh my gosh. I think what it is a big part of it has to do with the fact that you're probably going to be dying in these levels a lot, right? So you're going to be hearing the same songs over and over again. And if the song is unbearable, then you won't want to play the game. I think it's that simple, seriously. You know what I mean? No, especially back in the day.
It's a serious motivation to continue. I was just replaying the game Castlevania 3 over the last couple days, and when I was getting towards the end of the game,
it's a good thing you did,
and I kept dying.
There's a podcast about it.
Exactly. There's that track, Riddle, it's called. It's like when you're in like the second to last level or whatever. It's like that really fast track that has like fast arpeggios in it. And it's just like, anytime I died, it was like, well, the music is so good that I'm pumped up again. Like, I'm just like, I'm ready to go because the music rules. And I think it's a sort of inverse to that. In the middle of the game, you have those levels with all of like the falling block sections. And that's one of the more ambient tracks out of the game. And like, it sounds cooler in the original version of the soundtrack because with more sound channels, you can actually do an ambient kind of thing. But it's sort of like the worst track in the soundtrack, in my opinion, in the NES version. And it's just like when I'm dying here to like these frustrating falling block, like platforming sections, and the music is just like at its most boring for the whole soundtrack. I'm like, that's like when I'm at like my lowest motivation in the game.
That real talk, that falling block like thing on the way to death, that sucks.
Yes.
That was the only time I was happy to have Alucard with me.
Oh my god, yes. And there's such a thing. There's a moment there too, like when you get to the falling block section where it takes a really long time because you have to like scroll the screen upwards.
Yeah.
There's a time where like I flew up, but I didn't have enough hearts to make it to the very top. I made it to like the couple blocks that are underneath the top section, and from there you can't jump up to the top. Like you don't have an angle for it. But because I flew past the bottom section, the falling blocks never had a chance to land. They were just falling out the bottom of the screen at that point and not adding to anything. So I was literally trapped where I was. I didn't have hearts to fly. And the blocks were just not adding to anything. It's like, well, guess I got to jump to my death here.
Speaking of those later levels, what's so remarkable about this game, compared to a lot of like games from the time of the NES and even like early into the SNES, is that the late game doesn't suck. And that's such an I call this the Sonic effect, where like Green Hill Zone, Sonic 1, it's a great time, you're going fast, you're doing loops, and then like 4 stages later, it's like do pushing block puzzles, stand on platforms and wait for them to get to the end of something. And stuff like that, and it's just like so antithetical to the stuff you had fun with at the start of the game. But this game completely doesn't do that. Like in Dracula's Castle, that shit's still fun. You're still like having a good time with it. I think my only complaint is like some of the enemies start dealing a little more damage than they should. Like I don't think getting hit by a crow should take off a quarter of your health bar. But that just kind of goes back into my want of like better checkpoints and more like plentiful health pickups. I think that would help streamline the experience.
Yeah, something that would streamline the experience for sure is if they took the Bucky O'Hare approach, which is another Konami NES game that is awesome. It's very difficult. It's a really, really hard game, but the catch to that is that not only when you die, but when you use a continue, all of your mid-level checkpoints are like where you respawn. It never sends you back to the full beginning of the level. So you never go that far back when you use a continue. And it's kind of like, oh man, like I feel like Castlevania 3 could benefit from that. Cause it is really like, again, it's kind of funny looking back at these games cause I spent so much time in them. And, but Castlevania 3 is a game that I played a lot, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. I had a period where, it's like, oh, let me get all the endings, let me do all the things. Haven't really played it much since then. So in the last couple of days when I was playing it, I was telling myself, like, oh, I'm going to do this without save states. Like, I'm going to, like, go in, do it the old school way. And I gave up on it halfway through. Because I was just like, this is a brutal game. It's really hard. And, it's just getting sent far back is such a kicker. When you die to Dracula,
it doesn't send you to the stairs. Oh my god. Sorry.
It sends you to the middle level. And like and to compare that to Castle, and apparently in the Japanese version it does start you at Dracula again, but like in Castlevania 1, even that game, like some of the continues can send you back kind of far, but once you get to Dracula, even a continue doesn't send you back to the beginning of the last level. It spawns you at Dracula. And I'm just like, man,
because it knows really you should take it seriously.
It knows.
Yeah.
You made it to the final boss. It's the boss is still going to be work, so don't make you do a bunch of level stuff before that.
It knows that this is the part you're stuck on.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important thing for devs to recognize, is where is the player going to get stuck and what sort of like boons do they need to help them not break their controller there.
Yeah, and there is just not quite enough on that at that point in time. It's still, late 80s, early 90s where like they're making games more fair than arcade games. They're like, oh, we've made games that have like a start and finish to them, and like
but they still don't want you beating it in rental. Exactly.
And Castlevania 3 is in that weird spot where it's a really, really hard game. There's harder games on the NES for sure. Like I think it's apples and oranges sometimes. Like I would say Battletoads or Ghosts and Goblins is harder probably. But this is in the tier like closest to that. It's like this is a game you need to really pay attention to enemy movesets and placement. You have to be like super mindful of like, oh, don't get bumped by this while I'm walking up these stairs because I will fall to my death. It is a grueling, challenging game.
To me, this is I have like that differentiation between challenging and difficult. Difficult is when something is bullshit. If anyone listened to me talk about Link to the Past last episode, to me, Link to the Past is bullshit. This is challenging.
I disagree, Murph. You're wrong. I'm sorry. Continue.
And therefore, I have fun with it. Like, I think the Medusa head is one of the best enemies in game design because it is so straightforward. It is so within the player's control, but it's so easy to psych yourself out about it. Being like, this is the block where I can dodge it on. Nope, wrong. You get hit, you get knocked into a pit. Just like the psychology of the game and how it tricks the player into giving themselves damage is so good.
Yeah, I was going to say on the flip side to everything is like, I think what makes it the challenging thing is that consistency. Because like none of the bosses, they're all hard.
The bosses are bullshit.
I don't think
there are too many bosses.
Are consistent. Well, go ahead and tell the bosses you had troubles with.
The one I had the biggest trouble with is, I don't even really know what you call this boss. The triple coffin. Where it's where you have to fight the 2 mummies, then the Cyclops, then the demon, and you have to do that all in one.
Those coffin bosses come back multiple times in the different routes, because you could go other ways, and there'd be other. Like you'll see this hammer monster and all that stuff. They reuse those. So by that point in the game, number one, they were expecting you to have maybe seen those bosses before, which is why I don't mind boss reuses in games. Thank you, Dark Souls 2. I was gonna say is like, I don't think it's unfair. Is it difficult? Shit, yes. But like, even with those three coffins, I think the only issue is just like you needing health and needing heart pickups. But like the enemies themselves are just very clearly a pattern.
Yeah.
Like for instance, on that third boss, that like goat demon thing, what it does is it flies up. You just gotta bait it into slamming down. And you just whip it. That's all you do. And maybe it'll throw fireballs at you, but you gotta whip the fireballs and you're good. That's it. That's literally it. You don't have to get hit at all during that boss, you know? But the trick is learning that, and learning that takes probably 10 deaths, you know?
And if you're playing this as God intended, then you're not like having a save state right before the boss room. And, you know, then it's so impossible to practice the fight.
Yeah, if you're in the route where you have that flying, like, dragon skeleton thing as the boss, and earlier in the level you have all of the white dragon skeletons, that, you know, the wall-mounted serpentines.
Yes.
It's like, you have to go back and you have to, it's like you spend some time, like, learning the boss's movements. You're trying to figure out how the boss moves. Like, is it RNG? Is it scripted? Like, what you're trying to get a gauge for, like, how to learn the fight. But you get sent back so far and have to deal with, like, this really hard level getting there. It's brutal.
I am so shocked on that boss, because they split it in half. It's like, once you get to, like, a quarter of his health, it ends the fucking level, and you're like, oh, okay. And then, like, you fight him again, but if you die to that one, you start all over, and you're like, what the fuck? So.
Yeah. So on the opposite end of, like, the good game design spectrum with the Medusa head, I despise the Fleamen and the green slimes.
Yeah. I think I've come to terms with the Fleamen. I don't hate them too much. It's any time there's a section where they're being dropped by flying enemies, it's like, oh shit, it's on. You have to really be conscious of, like,
yes. That's my least favorite part in Castlevania 1, the level where all the Fleamen fly in.
Oh, I'm okay with it. But yeah, it's there's moments where you have to put up with stuff that's just really frustrating.
I think it's times like that I always keep in mind that, like, the sub weapon, like, in my head, you have the consistent toolkit of the Belmont whip, and then everything else is meant to compensate for the limitation. So then it's like the sub weapons of, like, the holy water, trying to nab people from down below with that downward trajectory intentionally, other than the sunlock. That is actually what it's meant for, right? Is that verticality, or otherwise the axe if it's above you. So, like, I always think of things in terms like that, and then, like, Alucard solves that problem, or Grant solves the problem of Trevor's mobility, because Trevor can't move worth shit. You know what I mean? It's like, I always think in those terms, and I never mind, like, the Fleamen. I think the worst enemy is the serpent. The skull serpents, yeah, they're bad.
Skull serpents are, there's so much health. So much health.
Yeah, you want holy water, and you want it to land on them when their head dips down to the ground. Otherwise, it's just like, it's a slog.
That was the only level where I died because I ran out the clock, because I was killing them slowly with Alucard's diagonal fireball.
Yeah, the clock cuts it really close in that level, and it takes forever with the fireball.
Yeah.
So I guess, something I would say as a minor criticism about, like, the bosses in general is that, like, so my whole thing with Castlevania is that just the aesthetic of the game is, like, the coolest. Like, I love the music, I love the visuals, I love the way the sprites look. In terms of quality of boss fights, just kind of okay. You could do far, far worse than Castlevania. I mean, so many NES games just, like, are absolutely atrocious to play.
You've seen the last boss of Ninja Gaiden.
Right. There's so many games where just the boss fights are atrocious. But even the NES Castlevania games at their best don't have boss fights that are as satisfying as, like, a good Mega Man boss.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I love the NES Mega Mans.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. They're so good. Yeah, and, you know, some fights are better than others in the Mega Man games, of course, but, like, when you pick your couple favorite bosses from like each NES Mega Man game, and that's the gold star for like the best boss fight that exists in an NES game. And the Castlevania doesn't quite reach that, but it reaches a level that's acceptable for sure.
I think the best fight to me, I didn't mind the death fight that bad, but that's because I had like a cool fight with it. But I do like I don't know what it's called, the Shadow Self, the one that's your Dark Link fight.
I cheese that fight.
Oh, yeah.
I cheese that fight so
Me
fucking
too.
hard.
I cheesed that fight, but also like the bit where I wasn't cheesing it was satisfying to do. And I think, like, I don't know much about the franchise going forward, as I've said, but like leaning into the dudes in armor, to steal a phrase, type of boss fight, I think would do the franchise better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess doppelgangers will exist in other Castlevania games without saying too much. So, that is a boss that will show up again.
Yep.
And it rules.
Do we have final thoughts on Castlevania 3? Or like what haven't we talked about?
Why wasn't Grant in the Netflix show?
They have in the final season there is like the woman is part of the dynasties, right?
Oh, is that right?
So I mean, I know the actual answer to that or whatever.
Is it because Trevor went to save Sypha, so he never encountered Grant?
It was because the writer, and this is going way back. So like I remember when they were pitching doing Castlevania 3 as a movie,
Mm-hmm.
and this is like more than 10 years before the Netflix show came out. And the Netflix show is actually like an alteration of that script from like more than 10 years back. So the guy had the lead writer had like a whole blog about like, oh, this is the Castlevania movie I'm going to be making. He was sharing a lot of his thoughts about it. And I remember his whole thing with Grant. It's really funny in retrospect is that, his problem with him is that like the setting of Castlevania is in a landlocked area. So it doesn't make sense that there would be pirates around. And, like, that was his reason for, like, writing out Grant. He's like, this character's dumb because there shouldn't be pirates. But I'm like, holy shit, like, the Netflix...
What a bad reason.
And this is 100% true. I guarantee I would be able to find a citation. I can find the old quote for that. That's an absolute...
I
absolutely what
100%
happened.
believe it for that. I'm blanking on his name because it's, like, so
Warren
similar.
Ellis, right?
Warren Ellis, that's it, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. That was his rationale. And it's so funny to me because in the Netflix show, there's a whole scene where, like, what's his name? I'm getting the characters' names mixed up. But the guys who can...
Isaac.
The Demon Forge Masters.
Isaac, you're talking about Isaac.
Yeah, Isaac is on a boat with a pirate.
Exactly what I was going to say. I'm just like, It's like, it should have been fucking Grant's boat. I don't know, like...
I guess from a writing
what the hell?
perspective, adding Grant kind of ruins the three-person dynamic of Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard in that show. But also, they split up, like, super early into the entire run of the show, so whatever.
Yeah. I know, I can get that. He didn't need to be a main character, but I'm just like, oh yeah, he should have been on that boat episode. Like, that's like, you know.
Yeah.
Yep, that was weird.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Is it time for plugs?
I can plug some stuff, I guess. I guess Illusory. Anything you want to plug? Anything that if our listeners liked your showing here, they should check out of yours?
Oh sure, yeah. So I have a YouTube channel called Illusory Wall. That's where I do the deep dives into Dark Souls and all the Souls games, their mechanics, how they work. Even though there hasn't been a new episode in years, it's been a hiatus for a long time. I have the Retro Game Audio podcast, which is lots of retro video game sound design analysis. Why does the Super Nintendo sound the way it does? Why does the Sega Genesis sound that way? And
you went on like a Konami NES spiel, like that was 2 hours long. So if you thought that the interesting stuff of the Castlevania 3 thing here, then check out that podcast because it was like boom, perfect.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've got two things. Yeah, I have one that there's an entire episode dedicated to all of Konami's NES soundtracks. And there's an entire episode about the VRC6 sound expansion that the Japanese Castlevania 3 used. So there's an episode about that specifically as well.
Right.
And then also you have a petition.
Yeah,
A
which
petition?
I have a petition. It's probably dead and not going anywhere, which I shouldn't say.
I believe
No,
in
go.
it.
Go sign. So, I recently did an episode about Dark Souls 2 has this chest in the Majula Mansion basement. That in the original version of the game, it has network functionality. The server can tell the game, without patching it, hey, spawn this item in the chest. They only ever used it in the original version of the game. They never used it in the Scholar of the First Sin re-release. So, Scholar of the First Sin is kind of supposed to be the definitive version of Dark Souls 2. But there were a few weaponry skins that were only made available in the original game. They never used that chest to give them out in the remake. Or the re-release, I should say. And so my whole pitch was like, okay, they never used it, it's never going to happen. But then while I was scripting the episode, I was like, wait a minute. The servers are offline on PC, so maybe there's a tiny shred of hope that as they're fixing the servers, it means like someone's actually looking at the servers for the first time in years. Maybe that means they could say, okay, let's use it. So I had a petition like, hey, use the chest when the PC servers come back online. Only a week after I made that video, the PC servers came back online. So I don't think that petition up for a week, and I don't think it reached the people involved. So I'm kind of like, maybe you can still do this, but yeah, I don't know. It might be too late. Who knows?
It was a noble goal.
I had to try. I knew it was a long shot. I wasn't really expecting it to work, but I was like, again, I didn't make the video with the petition in mind. I was just like, oh, I just want to talk about the history of the chest. It's kind of interesting, the history and implication of timed releases, blah, blah, blah. But then as I was scripting, I was like, I have to at least try. Like, I got it. If they added the reskins into Scholar of the First Sin, like, because of me, I would be like, holy shit. So I was like, I have to try. But yeah, probably not going to pan out.
Well, verily.
Thank you. Thank you. Dark Souls 2 is my favorite one, so like it meant a lot to me. Murph, what do you have to plug?
What do we have to plug? Well, on the Twin Geeks Network, we have a variety of ongoing podcasts, such as the Twin Geeks podcast, where Calvin and David go through full director filmographies. They have finally sent the last episode on Robert Altman, and it's a good episode. I'd recommend checking it out, because at the very end, they do the incredibly large tier list of like 55 different movies that guy directed over his lifetime. It's been a very interesting ride. I recommend checking it out. But in more recent publications, Calvin's other project, 808s and Pod Breaks, where he talks about different hip-hop and rap albums, and it's kind of branched down to more like music in general. Just had a new episode talking about Taylor Swift's latest album, and then going over some albums from 1975 that were very integral to Calvin's experience growing up. If you're looking for something more spooky this Halloween, I recommend checking out The Fright Files, where they look at sort of the broader scope of a horror franchise. Episode 1 is on The Ring, where they talk about the different Ring novels and spin-offs and such. That's a very good listen as well. I'm thinking of spoiling things with Steven and our recent guest Vaughn, where they talk about contemporary releases. The most recent one I listened to was Blonde, but I'm almost 100% certain they've done one since then, but I don't know the name of it. I'm not seeing here in my podcast list. So we'll act like it's a mystery.
Yeah. And Jack also, by the way, you didn't mention Jack there, but Jack does Office Hours and The Stacks with Steven, and he has an album out, which I promoted last episode, and I'll promote this episode too.
10-second beats.
10-second beats. Yep. And he also did our theme song. So yeah, big thanks.
Yes,
and also
the most recent episode of Office Hours, he talks about the composition of that and some of his influences for the different songs.
Ooh, exciting. And he is also next week's episode guest.
Yes. And when this episode itself comes out, there might be another Murph project that's debuted on the Twin Geeks. Something. The wind blows ill omens indeed.
Is it not time to say the name of it, or is it still? Are we still holding it back?
No, I'm going ARG with this.
Okay. All right. I won't bother. But anyways, The next episode we were like, Jack did our theme song. Clearly, we need a musical episode. And then we scrapped all of
Somehow.
that. And we
Somehow.
instead chose.
We went from like Jamalami and we wound up with Star Wars Masters of Terraskasi.
I don't know how it happened.
Which
I'm
is the
glad we're
PS1
playing it.
fighting game.
At the very least, we're unpredictable. That's the goal here.
Wild card.
Illusory Wall, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I love talking about Castlevania and video games in general, so this was a blast. Thank you.
Certainly.
All right. And we're fading out. Okay,
Much like an
good. Thank
illusory
you.
wall when you hit it.
Yeah.
We're getting good at this. Let me pause. Stop recording.